Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres, and today's video I am going to be going over the patch notes for update 8.1, which will be going live tomorrow. And let me tell you, this is going to be one hell of a patch, folks. So hold your horses and just bear with me. First off, we have the introduction of British aircraft carriers coming along. And this is the first time since the game was first introduced to players that a new full aircraft carrier branch has actually been introduced to the game. So this is the first time in 3 years that a new full branch of aircraft carriers is being introduced. They have unique capabilities of carpet bombing and just some fairly maneuverable aircraft by everything that I have seen from videos from community contributors and super testers. So definitely some major changes coming in regards to those. It will be very interesting to see how the game dynamics change with the British aircraft carriers coming in along there. And of course, this also has to do with the Fly Strike Win event, which is going to progress in pretty much the same way that it has so far, except that now there will be missions where you can earn things for early access to the British aircraft carriers, specifically the Tier 4, the Tier 6, and the Tier 8 aircraft carriers, Hermes, Furious, and Implacable. And the items you will be able to earn from these missions are florins and crowns. Now, it has not yet been specified how many of these will need to be used for gaining access to these ships or anything else for that matter. However, we can be reasonably sure that they will not exactly be cheap in that regard either. The one thing that is of note is that the aircraft carriers can only be redeemed in sequence or earned in sequence, so you'll have to start with the Tier 4 to the Tier 6 to the Tier 8. You can't just go straight to the Tier 8. So kind of the same way as when you got any of the missions for like the British destroyers, so on and so forth, in some of the prior events that were worked in pretty much the same way. Along with this, we have the Naval Aviation Collection, which is coming along. Completing the collection will grant you a permanent camouflage for the Tier 8 tech line aircraft carrier, the Implacable. And, well, let's just say it's a little bit ostentatious if I say so, but considering that this is the first full aircraft carrier branch that's been introduced since the game's inception, I think I can live with that. And of course, any florins or crowns or whatever, any duplicate items for the collection, once the collection is completed, will be redeemed for 15,000 credits each. We do have daily shipments that are coming along, and aside from the token air supply containers that are being put out, I think every 6 days with this run. Well, okay, every 5 days with this run, there's really not anything terribly worthy of note there. Now, we do have the next big change right in here. The first one being that radar is getting a little bit of an overhaul. Now, any ship that uses radar, while it will still have immediate detection of any ships within radar range, the enemy ships will no longer be detected by their allies immediately. Now, this isn't a complete lack of detection. Any enemies will still be popping up on the mini-map. However, they will not actually be rendered in the game world, so to speak, for their friendlies for about 6 seconds, giving destroyers, cruisers that are detected by radar some chance of dodging or at least using their maneuverability to avoid any potential incoming fire. Now, this does not negate the possibility for, say, blind firing or anything like that, but This is a little bit of a quality of life improvement for destroyers and light cruisers that have had problems with being picked up by radar and just getting focused down very quickly in the current game meta. So definitely a nice quality of life improvement in that regard for destroyers and light cruisers. There is another interface change taking place, however, which also will help with regards to detection, because now you will have unique indicators letting you know whether you are detected by way of radar, hydroacoustic search, or whether you are detected by proximity. This is another addition which will dramatically improve the quality of life of destroyers and cruisers, because now they will have a better means by which to determine what they need to do to get out of detectability range, especially considering radars tend to be relatively long range, hydros short range, and, well, assured detection is only about 2 kilometers. So definitely an improvement there. And just a very much needed change to basically the player's HUD and user interface. Now, of course, the next major change that is coming along here are changes to the flooding mechanics. And this one, I dare say, is huge, especially for players like myself who are battleship mains. Anybody who's ever played a battleship knows the fear of getting hit by a flood. That there are very few things worse than having used your damage control party, and next thing you know, you're hit by a full duration hit by a torpedo, full duration flood, and you go from like 75% health to nothing just from the flood. So this is a huge, again, huge change in game mechanics regarding flooding overall. And how this is changing is the actual flooding duration is being decreased, and the amount of damage that can be caused by a single flood is being reduced also. Now, the flip side of this is that you can now actually have more than one flood on your ship. You can have a flood on both the bow and stern of your ship, and 2 instances of flooding combined, just like having multiple fires on your ship, can cause substantial amounts of damage over time, which is a dramatic increase over what is basically the current game meta, where even just one flood is a substantial threat to your survivability overall in the game. And this change is being introduced mainly because too many players were ignoring other sources of damage, like, fires, simply for the sake that if they knew they were in torpedo range of a destroyer, they would hold on to their damage control because they were more willing to take damage from the fires that were chewing up their ship than they were ever willing to consider eating even a little bit of flood damage. So it will be very interesting to see just how this changes the overall gameplay and player interaction regarding flooding, and maybe it might even make some battleships in random and competitive matches a little bit more, dare I say, aggressive, because they're no longer having to worry about a single flood being a major threat to their ship. Instead, it can now be treated in much the same way as fires on the deck of the ship, where one flood, one fire is no longer a major concern. You can afford to tank a little bit of the damage without too much downside. The flip side of this, of course, being that any floods that are inflicted will affect the propulsion and the maneuverability of a ship that is actively flooding. So that is the one consideration that will have to be taken into account by anybody under the new flooding mechanic. Damage control is no longer an immediate requisite upon taking flooding, but at the same time, not using damage control basically means that you are acknowledging that you will have to deal with reduced maneuverability for the duration of the flood, or until you do use your damage control, which can influence your ability to dodge incoming fire and even just evade to begin with. Now, of course, this will not have a dramatic effect regarding players who just pop off their damage control for any damage over time component at all, but for more experienced players who know what kind of damage they can tank, what damage they can put up with, so on and so forth, it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. On a more minor note, there are some dramatic changes taking place to the map shards, which, honestly, looking at it, I'm not too much of a fan of. I thought shards was actually kind of fine as it was. So, yeah, I don't know what to think here. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. It looks like they're trying a little bit too much to make it like a mini Okinawa, and yeah, I'll leave that there. There are, of course, some other changes taking place regarding the port and in-game audio. The audio overall is getting some general improvements. Basically, synchronization of fireworks and bomb explosions in Dunkirk and Kronstadt, weather effects, air explosions, and shells hitting both land and aircraft are being modified, and just a couple of other changes overall to audio that really kind of just go over my head. But beyond that, just, I guess any change in that regard is positive, I suppose. I mean, sure, the game sounds phenomenal as it is, but I mean, granted, I also have some extenuating circumstances where my pickup on audio changes really isn't that phenomenal anyway, but that's a story for another time. Another somewhat major change, actually, are some changes to the in-game economy. Increasing tier has increased credit earnings for destroying higher tier ships. So, yeah, this is definitely going to be impactful, I think, although by the instance given, this seems more like it's going to be more impactful for mid-tier ships than anything else, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I think the mid-tiers are kind of a bit of a hefty grind anyway. Besides that, increased credit earnings are always going to be welcome regardless of where they are introduced. If this does affect higher tier ships like tier 8s taking out tier 10s, even better. So, especially considering I tend to do a lot of high tier batches lately. And of course, they are going to be doing some changes regarding support for operating systems, but I'm actually going to come back to that at the end of this video because they have a completely dedicated article for that. Something else that's changing is that the Minotaur is actually getting a nerf. And this is one that should make aircraft carriers happy because it will affect the detectability and basically damage taken anytime you are in the airspace of the Minotaur. So I guess you could say it's a nerf to the Minotaur or an indirect buff to aircraft carriers, depending on which way you look at it. But basically, it removes the ability for drifting into a undetected Minotaur's airspace and just getting completely obliterated before you even know what hits you. So, definite bonus there. Other things, signal flags and whatnot are being added to the arsenal for credits instead of just for coal redemptions. So, definite bonus there, especially considering I tend to use my coal for a lot of other things. Now, granted, I've just about got the John Bart, at which point the only thing really left for me to get via coal is the Charleston, so this isn't going to be a major concern for me in the long run. But seeing that some of these signal flags are not exactly easy to obtain for a co-op player, it's definitely nice having the option for getting these flags with credits via the arsenal, just because, well, if you have the credits to throw around for it, it's nice to be able to get them. So there is that. And of course, they are also adding containers of the North Cape collection to the arsenal for 5,000 coal each. And that's a bundle of 5 containers. So, yeah, okay. Kind of curious to see where that goes. There are some minor cosmetic changes for winter for the London port, and also with the Lunar New Year event being over, the Dragon port is being reverted to, I guess, what its off New Year theme is. And now for the next big issue. 8.1. The Alaska is finally here. Dare I say, it's about bloody time. Players have been calling for this ship again for how long? It has taken them months as work in progress to finalize this ship, and she's finally here. Move over Kronstadt, there is a new sheriff in town, and its name is the Alaska. She has her standard main armament of 305mm guns. She has the standard high-tier cruiser battleship secondary guns, the rapid-firing 127mm secondary guns, and she has the fairly standard, good quality AA suite that is seen on most US battleships and heavy cruisers. So, again, awesome. Looking at her statistics, she has fairly good detection range, fairly good main battery range, and her AA suite is pretty much standard ranges in that regard. Her armor profile is somewhere between that of a battleship and a heavy cruiser, which makes her a little bit tankier, and just overall her gun angles look nice and solid. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Alaska, this is CB-1, the first battle and only battle cruiser that was ever really produced by the US Navy, and is a ship that has been wanted in-game for quite a long time by the player base. So, yes, she's finally here. I have had the free EXP for this ship sitting in my port for about 2 months now, burning a hole in my hulls. I could definitely have like 2 or 3 tech lines completed for the amount of FXP this ship is going to cost. She is guaranteed 1 million FXP. So if you have it, make sure you hold on to it, because Alaska's here, she's coming out, and she will be available for purchase from the tech line tomorrow. Hoorah! It is very safe to assume that once I get a hold of this ship, you can expect a video out on her either tomorrow or on Thursday, one of the two, or maybe even this Friday, depending on how my work schedule works out. But definitely going to have a video out on her at some point within the next couple of days for just my impressions and my review on her. In other news, we are now moving on to event containers. Now, these are basically extensions of the Fly Strike Win campaign, or no, Fly Strike Win event, and this is going to affect the aircraft carriers for the Royal Navy as well, because these crates come with florins used for purchasing the Royal Navy aircraft carriers early. And of course, there are 2 different levels. You have the regular, which will be awarded in-game, and then you have the premium containers, which you can get from the premium shop. And the main difference between the two is that the premium shop ones will have increased numbers of rewards, so more of the special signal flags, more florins, more Union Jack camouflages, and also better chances of receiving any of the ships that are to be rewarded for these containers as well. And the ships that you can get from these containers include the Edinburgh, the main Tier 8 tech line light cruiser, but also the premium battleships HMS Hood, HMS Duke of York, and the Tier 8 premium HMS Vanguard. So if you don't have either of those ships, this is your chance to get a hold of them through these crates. Now, I will still put this out with the warning that I consider these crates to be a form of gambling. So, kind of purchase at your own risk. In my case, the only one I do not have is the Vanguard, so I do not expect to be really buying any of these because honestly, I'm not all that impressed by some of the things I've seen on the Vanguard. So if I get them at all, the only thing I'm really going to be looking for is Florins, and if I get the Vanguard, bonus. Just keep in mind that if you do go ahead and get any of these crates, there is not a guarantee of any of these ships being dropped, so only if you decide to spend money on them, only get what you can afford to basically lose and only get the pittance rewards for. There are a couple of other small things, just a couple of permanent camouflages being added for the Blaskovica and also for the Implacable. The Blaskas will be available by completing daily combat missions, and the Implacables will be earnable via the Fly Strike win campaign that is currently taking place. And of course, we also have ships that are being added for testing. We have a Tier 8 French destroyer that is being added, which I'm going to assume is going to be a premium destroyer. Not quite sure what to say there, knowing very little about it. There is also the Tier 6 Italian Junio Bruto being put in. Now, I can only assume that this is going to be their testing of the Tier 6 version of the Giulio Cesare. Beyond that, I have no real indicator. Now, the one thing that I am kind of up in the air about is the introduction for testing of Russian battleships, which, by my understanding, the Russian Navy really never had an effective battleship fleet, so yeah. I'm not going to say much more in that regard, except that I hope the Russian bias isn't going to be too strong with any of these ships. Well, you can hope, right? Beyond that, we just have copies of the cruiser Cleveland and destroyer Kagero that are being put in. I guess just testing variations, but beyond that, nothing major that I'm noticing. And of course, one final change, they are introducing the ability to open all containers on your supply ship now, instead of having to click through each individual container at a time and just taking an insufferable amount of time redeeming all of your crates. So definite bonus and quality of life improvement there. Beyond that, just a laundry list of minor fixes and changes that I really personally don't seem to care too much about. The next thing, however, is coming back to what I was mentioning earlier about their elimination of support for 32-bit operating systems. Basically, the game is just becoming a little bit too advanced for these operating systems, where it's actually taking their development team, whatever, just more time to support these systems than is really, I guess, viable for the game's longevity. So they are discontinuing support for the 32-bit operating systems, as well as any systems operating versions of DirectX that are below version 10.1. Now, they have also stated that players will still be able to play the game on 32-bit operating systems or lower versions of DirectX 10. They simply will no longer offer technical support for any difficulties on these systems or with these software versions. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But part of why they're doing this is to, I guess, minimize the amount of effort that their development team has to put into putting out new updates, new ships, whatever, to cater to these lower capability operating systems or processing softwares. And above all, it will increase their capability of just optimizing the game as a whole for players who have up-to-date systems. They can focus more on the optimization, again, for higher-end or higher performing systems, instead of trying to basically dumb everything down for the lower capability systems that they are, again, no longer going to be supporting. So if you have a 32-bit operating system or anything lower than DirectX 10.1, if you file a support ticket for any technical difficulties, you can basically consider yourself being shucks out of luck. Because you might basically just get a consolation notice and statement that your versions are no longer supported and that you might need to update your system in order to play the game adequately. Now, I do doubt statistics somewhat, but given some of the numbers that they're showing here, it seems like it's only a small minority of players who actually use 32-bit operating systems or lower quality versions of DirectX. But yeah, again, there are some things that have taken place recently where I have to doubt wargaming statistics somewhat anyway, but again, that's another matter entirely that may not even have anything to do actually with any of this here. The only thing I can assume is that they are doing this for positive development of the game, and I guess in hopes that it will improve the game's longevity moving forward. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you all. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy seeing some of my replays and just getting overviews of patch notes and upcoming changes. On that note, I shall let you all go. Take care, happy hunting, and I will catch you all in battle.